And you can see right there, it does say Richard B. Cheney, the 46th Vice President of the United States, died last night, November 3rd. He was 84 years old. His beloved wife of 61 years, Lynn, his daughters Liz and Mary, and other family members were with him as he passed. The former vice president died due to complications of pneumonia and cardiac and vascular disease. For decades, Dick Cheney served our nation, including as White House Chief of Staff, Wyoming's Congressman, Secretary of Defense, and Vice President of the United States. Dick Cheney was a great and good man who taught his children and grandchildren to love our country and to live lives of courage, honor, love, kindness, and fly fishing. We are grateful beyond measure for all Dick Cheney did for our country, and we are blessed beyond measure to have loved and been loved by this noble giant of a man. I do want to bring in Rich Rubino now, political analyst and historian, as we talk more about the life and legacy of Dick Cheney. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
My pleasure, Josh.
All right, so first off, I do want to ask you here, in your opinion, what do you think, based on your expertise, of course, you're a political historian, how Dick Cheney will be remembered when it comes to his time as vice president?
I think is arguably the most powerful vice president in American history. I think that he saw after Watergate, when he was involved with the Ford administration, he saw really a diminution, if you will, of the power of the presidency. And he said at the time, this is that he wanted there to be that he wanted to be more power in the executive. And I think he had really achieved that when he was vice president. I think a lot of the power was actually given to the vice presidency, and it was in many respects a co-presidency between George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. And he really brought the power of the president from the low water mark when he was chief of staff under President Ford up to the high water mark, I think, when he was vice president when he left office.
One thing that's interesting that a lot of people have brought up, what did it tell us when we learned that he was going to actually vote for Kamala Harris in the last election, not for the Republican candidate, President Trump, but Kamala Harris? What did that tell us about his politics over the last, I would say, couple decades?
That the Republican Party really changed, and I think it really went back to a 1920-style Republican Party. The Republican Party under Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover from 1921 to 1933. As a matter of fact, Warren G. Harding, when he ran for president in 1920, actually called himself an America First candidate. And Donald Trump was very similar to that. He said that the Iraq War was one of the biggest mistakes in American history. He was against the idea of the war in Afghanistan. This was when he ran for president. And he was very much a critic of the Republican Party and the way that it basically was from Eisenhower in 1952 when he got the nomination all the way through Mitt Romney in 2012. Donald Trump really transmogrified that, and he was an economic nationalist rather than a free trader. When it came to immigration, he wanted to curtail not only illegal immigration, but legal immigration as well. And of course, on foreign policies, he was a lot less interventionist, whereas Dick Cheney, I think, really the flagship issue of his presidency being the war on terror in terms of the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, where the United States escalated and sent troops. This was really something that Donald Trump actually disdained, to the point where many kind of old-style George W. Bush Republicans landed up actually supporting Vice President Harris. And Cheney was not the only one, but I think from an ideological perspective, Donald Trump really changed the views of the Republican Party.
And we know, of course, funeral arrangements are being made at this time. And I'm not sure if you can speak to it, but how exactly does a funeral work for a former vice president? Because we've seen it recently with Jimmy Carter when we're talking about president. For a vice president, is it the same kind of send-off? Do you see former vice presidents, former presidents that show up to say a final goodbye?
Sometimes it depends. You probably will see George W. Bush there. Just as you look at former vice presidents in the past, I think that when Hubert Humphrey died in 1979, right before that, when he had cancer, they actually had him speak. This was kind of unprecedented. He was the first incumbent member of the Senate, because he went back to the Senate after he lost the presidency in 1968, former vice president, and he actually gave an address to the United States Senate in capacity as a United States senator, as an incumbent. But usually you do not see the pomp and circumstance of a presidential funeral. It's a lot more private. But my guess is that certainly George W. Bush will probably make an address. Probably Lynn Cheney will make an address, but I don't think you're going to see a lot of coverage over it, but it's not going to rise to the level of, say, Jimmy Carter's funeral or Gerald Ford's funeral or George H.W. Bush's funeral, which really had a lot of pomp and circumstance.
As far as things that maybe people don't know about Dick Cheney, you are a political historian. Is there anything that comes to mind when you think about things that maybe people don't know?
I think that Dick Cheney, and you're going to hear a lot of this today, Dick Cheney are going to be pigeonholed as a neoconservative. He really wasn't a neoconservative. Neoconservatives are a very specific group of Republicans. They go back actually to they were essentially Democrats who supported the great Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. They supported social programs, but they started to believe they went too far. Irving Kristol, who was one of the founders of the neoconservative movement, said that neoconservatives were liberals who were mugged by reality. And they wanted intervention in foreign policy. In 1972, George McGovern was a Democratic nominee. He talked that his slogan was "Go Come Home, America." Consequently, many Democrats who supported Henry Scoop Jackson, who was very much a hawk in foreign policy in the primaries, and then supported him again in 1976, migrated. They were kind of boat people, if you will, and they migrated over to the Republican Party and supported Ronald Reagan in 1980. But they still, a lot of them can maintain their liberal views on domestic policy. Dick Cheney was not that. Dick Cheney was more of a traditional conservative. It was intervention. I think that it was, when it comes to intervention, his views on domestic policy were still very conservative, but he did support intervention, certainly in the first Gulf War. But then after that Gulf War, he was very much said that he believed that the United States had made the right decision at the time by not going in past Basra and trying to end Saddam Hussein's power, Saddam Hussein dislodging him from power. He said that there would be too many troops there. This was really a schism here between him and the more traditional conservatives and the neoconservatives like William Kristol, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, for example, who really wanted the United States and believed that it was the United States' authority as the hegemonic power in the world to go in and take out Saddam Hussein. That being said, after September 11th, his worldview changed, and he became very much of a hawk, and he worked with the neoconservatives in the administration. Interestingly, many of those neoconservatives did not support George W. Bush for president in 2000. George W. Bush that year ran on a tax cut, for example, and he ran on a Medicare, on adding a prescription drug benefit to Medicare. But when it came to foreign policy, he talked about the ugly Americans, and he basically talked about a more humble foreign policy. That all changed in 2000, and the neoconservatives had a lot of influence, and they certainly had a lot of influence over Dick Cheney. And with that, Dick Cheney became one of the major architects of both the interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, respectively.
All right, Rich Rubino, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and to talk more about the life and legacy of Dick Cheney. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And I do want to take you out to this post here from Fox News saying, breaking: former Vice President Dick Cheney, who served under President George W. Bush during the 9/11 attacks and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, has died at 84. Quote, "We are grateful beyond measure for all Dick Cheney did for our country, and we are blessed beyond measure to have loved and been loved by this noble giant of a man." That is according to a statement from the family. As we get more information here about funeral arrangements and things of that nature, we will make sure to bring those to you on Live Now from Fox, as we always do.